Yeah, we're live now. Yeah, cool.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Soapbox event run by New Zealand Asian leaders. This is an opportunity for us to learn from each other and about how to survive, thrive, and lead in New Zealand. Before I go into the formalities, I would like to introduce you to Rochelle from this dojo to talk about the exciting health and safety. Very important.
Very important. So, hey team, I'm Rochelle. I am the community ambassador at the dojo Market Lane. So, in the event of a fire, just came back the same way that you entered into the space. So, right up, if there's a fire, we need to use the stairs. So, they are just in the corridor opposite reception. So, take a left into the corridor and then immediate left into the staircase. If you need to use the bathrooms tonight, feel free to do so. Straight up the ramp again from where you came from at reception and go down the corridor and then turn right for the bathrooms. If there is an earthquake while you are here, please drop cover and hold, and please stay in the building until further notice is issued by myself or the manager here, Jasmine. In the event of a fire, I am the fire warden, so look for me, my high vis and my hard hat, and I will help you exit safely. Have a great night, team.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Rochelle. And welcome again, everyone. I would like to just quickly talk about the New Zealand Asian Leaders. It's a non-profit organization based in Auckland, and with its mission to accelerate the contribution from Asian leaders to New Zealand. And in Wellington, our focus is to work with the members to help each other to survive, thrive, and lead in New Zealand, hence today's theme. We are all volunteers, the Wellington Committee members, and if you look around, there are some people with red dots on their name tag. So if you have any questions at all, please contact any one of us, and I'll just quickly go through that from this end. Priscilla, Sporia, Mavis, Peter. Yeah, I'm leaving David until the end.
Very important.
Graham, Victor. Graham hasn't joined the committee yet. Maybe. If you're not interested, Graham, all you need to do is to just let me know. By the way, I'm Kyle, the chair of the New Zealand Asian Leaders in Wellington. So, on that note, I would like to introduce David Lee, who is the MC for today's session.
Your own Nui. We have two very interesting, outstanding speakers tonight. We had a bit of a false start with Golriz in a previous Nzal meeting. I think she was yet to stay in the house for some reason. Two quite different stories, but definitely personifying the theme of survive, thrive, and lead. So first up we'll have Golriz. She is an Iranian Kiwi refugee who survived the war and persecution, and she's Oxford educated, has a very distinguished career in law here in New Zealand and was overseas. One point of interest is she was on the UN tribunal working on both the defence and prosecution. Justice drives her, and she is the first refugee to be sworn as an MP here in New Zealand. So I'll let Golriz tell the story.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā karana tana maha, tana katoa. Thanks for having me. Thank you for that kind introduction, David. And thank you to the board committee of volunteers. It's so incredibly important and heartening for me having and lived here now for some 28 years to finally see some Asian community leadership taken and for us to come together to empower each other and talk to each other and to kind of be prominent in our communities here in New Zealand. So thank you for the work that you do. I'm told I'm to speak about my life and just tell my story. And my life began with a political revolution. So it's in my blood. The Iranian Revolution was one of the biggest popular revolutions that the modern world has ever seen. Everybody poured out onto the streets in Iran. They were socialists, they were communists, they were Islamists, they were students. They were fighting to nationalize their oil resource. They were fighting to take it back from what they saw as an imperialist leader who was selling off our interests overseas, and they wanted Iran to have a democracy. I always note that that revolution happened in such a diverse way because people do forget that in our ethnic communities we actually have diversity. We don't speak with one voice, we don't think with one mind, and I think that's something that I bring to my politics here. But that revolution was hijacked. My parents were in it. They put their lives on the line, and to bring home the violence that they experienced fighting for democracy. My grandmother used to say that at the end of every day of protest she would go to the morgue and have a look, and it was hard to actually identify bodies because tanks had run over some of them. So that's the kind of, that's what they faced for democracy, and ultimately it was hijacked. It became an Islamic regime, and my life was ultimately shaped by one of the most repressive regimes in the modern world, the Islamic Republic of Iran. My parents remained political, and their whole generation, I think, has been searching for answers since, and keeps trying to explain what happened. You know, this isn't what they intended. My mother went to university after she'd had me, and I remember her stories of every day as her form of protest. She would refuse to sit at the back of the class where women were meant to sit. She would go up to the front and she'd sit there and she would wait until someone asked her to move, and she'd want them to say please. And that was her form, that was her resistance. She never went and sat at the back on her own because she constantly wanted them to remember that it was wrong, and for them to have to go through the process of asking her to sit at the back. That was dangerous. And when they finally instituted Islamic dress for women, 1 million Iranian women marched on the street at gunpoint, again putting their lives on the line at the risk of torture for equality. And they were mostly, overwhelmingly, Muslim women. They just didn't believe in being told how to dress. So these values exist in all cultures. And I am asked this constantly as a politician, you know, how did you assimilate so well to our culture here? And I ask back, you know, what do you mean? What makes you think I'm so well assimilated? And they say, you know, feminism, democracy, human rights, all of these things, having higher education, and those are the values that I brought with me. My mother was a child psychologist, though she never worked because she refused to sit religious exams. She would apply for jobs, get them, and refuse to sit the exam knowing that that would go on her record, but again as a form of protest. My father was an engineer. He was an agricultural engineer. He was working on extracting energy from plant products. Green to the core, right? So these values come with us. We come from different places, and the dominant voices in our cultures often suggest otherwise. But I think part of the job of us empowering each other here is to make sure everybody knows that these are universal values, that we need to amplify the voices within our communities that speak to different values within us, and whether that's feminism, democracy, human rights, environmentalism, because we're not just one thing. So when things got too dangerous, we fled, and my parents left their professions and their friends and their culture and their language and their family. And they came here through Malaysia. We arrived in Auckland Airport, and I remember I was 9 years old, and we were in transit because we had a ticket. We could come to Malaysia because that was an Islamic country, but we couldn't come to New Zealand. We could go to Fiji. So we had a ticket with the stopover, and so we were trapped in the transit area of Auckland Airport, and we needed to escape transit to tell someone that we were refugees. And so I'll never forget that escalator at Auckland Airport that goes down, that separates international from New Zealand law and jurisdiction and life. And we needed to come down that escalator, and we tried a couple of times, and someone helpfully told us to go, you might be lost, And we of course thought they were trying to prevent us from claiming asylum, but I'm pretty sure they were just being kindly. And then we eventually made it, we eventually made it on, and we made it down the escalator, and we just found the first person. And that terror, that absolute anxiety of knowing that we could be returned and that the worst could happen. Everyone in Iran knew someone who, whose phones were tapped, who was disappeared, who was lashed, and much worse. And so we carried that with us, and we had nothing else. We were tourists, so we couldn't bring anything else with us. We were just sort of had nowhere to go back to. And so we came down that escalator, and we found someone, and we told them, we're refugees, and we were welcomed. So that always makes me emotional. But we were welcomed here because there are human rights here. And so that's something that I took with me, obviously, into my work. I grew up in a very diverse area in Auckland, West Auckland, and then in the city where I went to Auckland Girls Grammar, which is 80% Pacifica Māori, and the rest are relatively diverse as well. Just off K Road, where you have to walk past Auckland's probably most prominent homeless community, sex workers. It's gritty. And that also is something that I take with me, that humanity that comes with knowing that those things exist in life, and that doesn't make us less human. I'm one of these people who had a 10-year plan. And between working as a waitress and my parents' eventual little ventures on things, and I finished law school. But I never wanted to be a lawyer. I ended up interning at Amnesty International. I wanted to work in human rights, and then I very, very quickly realised that this wasn't about me working in human rights. It was about making human rights effective, and that the most effective way to do that was to learn how to be a lawyer, and a law degree does not give you that. So I had to have a plan about how I would learn to work in a courtroom and enforce human rights. And the most pure form of human rights law, I think, in New Zealand is criminal law. In court, every single day you're applying the Bill of Rights Act, the Human Rights Act, you're talking about racial profiling, you're talking about police powers, unlawful search, seizure, arrest, detention. You're looking at where those powers can be curtailed because of people's rights. That's something that, of course, didn't exist in Iran, but that is something that I understood, having gone through the experiences that I'd gone through, was essential to holding governments to account. And that's what I got to do every day. And I was a defence lawyer, and probably one of the most, one of the cases that stayed with me the most and shaped my worldview thereafter was when I got to be a junior barrister on a murder trial of a young boy who just turned 14 and thrown over a bridge and killed someone in the car. And having to represent him, he was a child, he was Māori, he was from South Auckland, he had a SIPS file that we got to see, he had mental health issues that we had diagnosed, and we could barely communicate with him as his advocates, and the anxiety that comes with that, when you're trying to uphold someone's rights in those circumstances, without all of that context being able to be brought into the courtroom, feels so deeply unfair, and you kind of you get a feel for what you need to fix if you're going to fix deviancy and crime. But I did have a 10-year plan, and my 10-year plan was to work in human rights law. So I knew I had to come out of the criminal justice system and come back to that. So I had this Oxford Master's degree, which is the Oxford, the Masters of Studies. They have weird names for all of their degrees in international human rights law, and it was only open to professionals. So they didn't want you to come out of uni with really good grades. They wanted you to show that you've worked in human rights. So I applied for that. That had been on my little bookmarks thing for 3 years as I was working as a junior barrister, and I finally opened it and applied and got in. But just when that happened, I had the fortune of meeting a very senior lawyer in the UN who was in New Zealand interviewing some people, witnesses, and he was working at the Rwanda Tribunal. And I met him, and we talked, and he said, you should come and intern over there, and we could probably get you a job, because what we're looking for are lawyers who've worked in the courtroom, and all we keep getting is these UN human rights academics, and we don't want them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what evidence is. They don't know what a courtroom looks like. So I went over and I interned for this defence team. And those justice institutions are just as much about holding governments to account. You've got, for the first time in the world, an answer to the way that a society resolves conflict that's intergenerational, that's ethnically based or religious based, and the cycle will continue until you can individualize blame, say that you can hold military leaders to account, you can hold political leaders to account, in fact that you can criminalize them, you can lock them up for breaching their powers. And the cycle can end because it's not about groups against groups. Having said that, the UN system isn't perfect and very slow and very expensive. From there, I got a job in The Hague at the Yugoslavia Tribunal, and eventually I did my master's degree between all of this and ended up prosecuting at the Khmer Rouge Tribunal in Cambodia, which was a different experience, obviously, than defence, and I cherish it, although the moral superiority didn't go well with me. I came back to New Zealand because I realised that I wouldn't really have a home unless I returned, because being an expat, people ask you where you're from, and you have that split second thinking about your accent or the way you look, and you kind of go, I'm a Kiwi, and they go, no, but you know where you're from. Or you say I'm Iranian, and they go, but you speak English so well. So I didn't want to be without roots, and I came back to New Zealand, and I found New Zealand quite changed. I had found New Zealand to be an egalitarian, fair and pretty open society, and I came back and we were trying to log the national reserves, and we had child poverty stats that were being criticised by the United Nations, and I was involved in child rights, having been through that case. Earlier I'd become really involved in child rights in New Zealand, and that was something that I came back to. So I realised that actually I want to be political, I want to be properly political, I want to engage at a broad policy level, and I ran for Parliament. Am I going really over time?
No, I want to take a photo of you. I'm not checking it.
Politics in 5 minutes. So I ran as a candidate. I announced my candidacy the same week as Donald Trump. No, not as a candidacy. He had already won. The same week as he initiated the so-called Muslim ban.
Oh.
So the world was in tatters over, the leader of the free world saying that people can and can't have certain rights based on the place that they were born. And of course it was people who were born in Muslim countries, including Iran. And then here was this little island nation, as we are, with an actual refugee running for their highest lawmaking body. So I had this very, overblown probably for first-time candidates reaction to my candidacy, where I had this outpouring of support from all around the world. Brexit had just happened, Trump had been elected, and people, wanted a counterpoint to that, and including in New Zealand as well, from young men and women who had grown up here and had never seen anyone that looked like them, with their story running for Parliament. But with that came an outpouring of attacks. And in my maiden speech, I acknowledged that, and I wanted that House to know and acknowledge that actually, as someone who is from a background that's never been seen in Parliament, I get told every day that I have no right to be there. I have no right to comment, even when I comment on Green Party policies, that I shouldn't criticise the government, that I should just be glad that I wasn't left to die, that maybe I should have been left to die, and then it goes into it's time to load up shotguns.
Really?
Yeah. So I get death threats, I get threats of violence, I get
gosh.
threats in all sorts of other ways, but mostly I just get people telling me I haven't got the right to be here. And I wanted that House to know, because I wanted our politicians to know that they contribute to this every time they scapegoat migrants. That we do feel it out there on the street. Because we can't shed our skin. We can't assimilate enough ever. And I know that I've got friends who are, fourth generation Chinese Kiwis, and they get told to go home where they came from regularly. And it happens across the House. It's not just one party or the other. And it happens, one of the things that I remember most prominently from kind of growing up in terms of racism was when Paul Henry did a different thing. They're both, it's not a good name. But when Paul Holmes called Kofi Annan a cheeky little darkie,
Yep.
and he apologised, but we knew deep down what that was saying to us is no matter how high you rise, he was the Secretary General of the United Nations. I'm just a member of Parliament. No matter how high you rise, we can just make a little joke to put you back in your place. So that's not okay. We don't have to laugh at those jokes. And I want us to stop. It's outrageous. And kids are receiving that. So that has to change. And feminism has to change. Because we do need to recognise that our women we don't need to be rescued from our cultures. We bring feminism with us. It's really staunch. It's really authentic. It just looks different. And my mother always says, I don't know how you leave the house without wearing lipstick on, I'd feel naked. Because to her, back in Iran, putting on that makeup was a sign that she didn't agree with the regime. So being colourful, being sexualised, being visible was what feminism looks like, still in Iran. It's the exact opposite of feminism for people of her generation in the West. But the patriarchy is different. We're still fighting for equality. So feminism has to change. We have to show ourselves as diverse communities. We have to amplify the voices within our communities that speak to equality, to democracy, above those who would silence them. But I am very heartened that we're coming together more and more to stand together to have these conversations. So
And for that really chilling reminder of the level of justice overall. But it was also a reminder that today is the 20th anniversary of suffrage.
Wow.
So we've come a long way, but there's still, sorry, 125.
Yeah.
But it's still a long way to go. And also, the struggle that you can hear in New Zealand, I'm 40 years old, I get the same type of response too. So would you like to take some questions or would the audience?
oh yeah, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, is there any questions? Yeah. Hi.
Your mum and dad, so they're both here?
Yeah, they're both
So
here.
you've got family here. Do they
Yeah.
live in Auckland?
They live in Auckland. They've separated, but we still come together for holidays and birthdays and stuff. Yeah, they're still around. But I mean, I recently had, over the past year, I've had both of my grandmothers pass away and we can't go back.
Right.
So there's that reminder
Yeah,
again
yeah.
as life events happen that you kind of, who would choose that unless you were, you know, yeah. So,
Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Lingy, I work at Creative HQ. Thank you very much for your talk. You mentioned something about generations, like fourth generation, still getting this. Do you see, in how many generations do you see this kind of changing, this narrative? Every single conversation that we have, it's kind of edging it towards a better society that we see as more inclusive, equality, everything. You know, how often, how long would you see, especially if it's been generations of, you know?
I think the idea of what isn't Kiwi has to change. And, you know, we see some alarming developments recently where there's, you know, this guarded version of it, which is very Pākehā actually, like it's, you know, and actually I want us as Asians or migrants to talk more directly with tangata whenua, because I think we've got so much more in common than we realise. Most of us have experienced some degree of imperialism where we've been alienated from our resource or language or something, and it's the same. So, you know, we are not Indigenous here, but they are, and that's who we need to connect with. That's, for me, that's kind of going to be the beginning of that kind of background. We'll see what I put up or whatever, and they're getting that. But some of what's been effective has been because actually we are very vulnerable and we're isolated otherwise, like highlighting it and getting people to come in with like supportive voices. So I think we actually need to call on allies to make their voices heard as well. It can't just be us constantly answering that stuff. It needs to be middle class, cisgendered people as well. And so we kind of need to connect with them and kind of tell them to be louder when those other voices come up, and you know, protest, and we can protest too, but yeah. I don't know if that clarified how many generations.
That's good.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I'm actually a multiple serial migrant, and I've just migrated to New Zealand actually about 2 weeks ago, so I'm real fresh. Yes. I've really enjoyed listening to what you were talking about and really kind of felt the emotion coming from you as well. But as you kind of progress through your career, through your life, you really kind of thrive and led. Can you speak a little bit to this topic of privilege and how it embodies itself in the attacks towards you, and also how then you use your, I guess, you gain privilege now, and you know, how do you deal with that? How do you kind of use that to lift others up?
Yeah, I mean, privilege is really multifaceted, and I do come from a place of privilege in the sense that, at least in Iran, we were middle class, you know, an educated family, and so, and that, you know, that kind of actually shows up in studies about refugees and what happens with them, because we don't suffer from that kind of intergenerational poverty, for example, or what happens when colonisation is the thing that's keeping you down. But we do suffer from some epic event that's just happened within that generation that's meant that we have to flee. So we came with nothing, but I still had that privilege of thinking of myself in terms of like, oh, I will go to university one day, which isn't the case with children that grow up with intergenerational poverty. So I had that entitlement, so to speak, you know, and still kind of happening for me, even though we didn't have money anymore at all. But I have gained privilege now because, you know, I get to have this platform, and even if I look at like people from the Muslim world, and I'm not Muslim, but I constantly have to be cognizant of that's what I in part represent. You know, a man from Iran in his 30s probably travels with way more problems, and I, you know, so even in a weird reverse way, that's a privilege being a woman, even though I'm seen as having been rescued from the culture. I think I do think we need to start using our privilege in ways that bolster each other, and I do it by constantly speaking to these issues when it actually garners all of these attacks, but at least I can respond to them, and I have a network of people who want to respond to them, whereas when it happens to someone who's just, you know, a team who happens to be Chinese or whatever, they put it up and they get attacked. We know from studies that women of colour get the most attacks online, to the point that like massive. I mean, it's Amnesty International New Zealand has a campaign as a major human rights issue. Women being silenced online, and they know that the attacks on women of colour are like tenfold. But so we do need to actually ask others to speak up for us, and that's kind of what I feel like I'm doing, because I'm at least highlighting it from this position that I have, and responding, and then getting the people networks around me. I have the Green Party around me. I have people that can come in and go, no, there's actually that isn't a New Zealand value. We stand for something else. I don't know how we get them to do it. I try and draw on my words for that.
I think that's the key, is we need to unlock. You talked about alliance, you talked about a sense of belonging, or this kind of, put people in place, and just with a joke you can kind of rob someone of their sense of belonging, and it works so hard to get. And I think allies is key, but it's not just that. That's not the only solution. It has to be a whole system.
No, but I mean, I can't in good conscience tell a young woman of colour to just lean in and shatter the glass ceiling. That's gaslighting. Literally, she can't. She is going to face violence of some sort, whether it's online or not. So the system does have to change, and everyone has to come together and kind of do that. And I mean, that's, I guess, the point of my maiden speech in that house is to, I did individualise. I did actually quote from different politicians in that house who said various things. So they knew who they were, so the allies need to call them out. We need to call them out if we feel safe, but we don't always feel safe. Sometimes it's about deflecting it off one person who's on the receiving end, so that they can breathe, but we can't do it on our own.
Yeah, work together.
Yeah, lots.
Being in a privileged society, do you think there's a level of entitlement by some who believe that they're entitled to more than others?
Yeah, well, it feels like their privilege is diminished because equality is happening. And that's what it feels like when you've got so much, and it's equalising. It's only equalising, but it feels to them like they're being victimised. I don't know how to deal with that, because it's like
sharing means I'm giving up.
Yeah, but they are giving up something. Like if you enforce a quota, they are giving up something. But we're only equalising things. They're not a victim. They just used to have a lot more than their share, their fair share.
In an entitled society, they feel that they've lost.
Yes, well, because they have, but it's about time. To get it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I took so long.
There you go. That's amazing to hear your story. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I'll be passionate on Thank you so much.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
So next up we have an equally amazing superstar, Laurie Foon. She's a good friend of mine, and she's I think she's a real pioneer in terms of the eco branding of eco fashion, founder of Starfish Fashions. I think she's won so many awards. I think the only the most recent would be she was awarded the Absolutely Positive Wellington Award last year, and the Kiwi Bag Hero, the local hero award. But I'm sure she's climbed, because where she goes, she's away at some event or receiving some award. I would love to hear your story, Laurie.
Wow. It's a bit hard to come up after all.
Can you do the slides for me, David? Thank you. Yay. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Laurie Foon ahau, ko whanganui a tara ahau, ko Ngāti Pākehā, nā hui nāmana o ko iwi. Just recently I've learned that in my life, to say that I'm Chinese and Māori. And I agree with Golriz that actually, being a minority, it's really important to connect with our Māori people because they give us place to talk about our history. And I've turned 50, and it's amazing that I'm just being encouraged to talk about my Chinese ancestry now. And yeah, all my life it's been the thing that I don't talk about. So and David actually has been a major encourager of helping me to get that story out there. So I live in Wellington. I actually grew up in Wainuiomata. I'm the mother of two beautiful, amazing children. One of them was meant to be here and she just missed that. She's going to be very upset about that. The things that have shaped my path have been, I've been fiercely independent all my life. And that's one of the reasons why I think I love riding my bicycle. Because actually I don't have to wait for anyone. I can just go and I can get there under my own steam. So that's one of the reasons. So everyone's got a different reason why they do that. Also, business. I really love business for that reason because you are your own boss and you can make things happen in your own time. I really value what's unique, which is probably the reason why I started a fashion business because actually I love clothes, but I just wanted to make women be and feel the best they could be. And that was the driver for the 20 years while I was in business. And the other thing is that I really believe we need to live in harmony with each other as people, but also with our planet. And that is why I love my job at the Sustainable Business Network, where I am, and I've been for the last 4 years. And with a last name like Foon, and clearly why I'm in the room, I'm also 4th generation Chinese. And you can't really see here, but it's an honour to bring up my great-grandfather, William Yan Foon, here today. He's got an amazing story, certainly one of survive, thrive and leadership, but he escaped from the hills of Canton. He followed an uncle over to Otahuhu to work on the farm. The uncle wasn't very kind. I think grandfather had quite a soft heart, great-grandfather, so he took off, came down to Petone, where he was the first naturalised Chinese man in the Lower Hutt region. He didn't actually connect too well with the other Chinese community, and after a while he met my great-grandmother and they married. She had been in a past marriage. I'm sure there might have been a little bit for her to survive, and great-grandfather offered her that security. Great-grandfather planted many gardens in the Petone area, and one of the lovely memories my great-aunties talked about was they walked prams over Ava Bridge and could see great-grandfather in his garden gardening. But he went on to have, can you just flip the slide a little one over, David? So you can't see this, but this was a shock to me. These are market gardens in Lower Hutt. And so while I think William's garden was probably a little bit softer and rounder because he really enjoyed being in that garden, it's amazing that that's actually what was out in the hut because those soils are beautiful and fertile. And while great-grandfather had quite a hard life, so when he died, he lived with my dad and he couldn't speak English when he died. And even although he couldn't speak English, he had a wife, 4 sons, about 3 shops, one in Petone, one in Newtown, selling fruit and vegetables. But great-grandmother was his main communicator and his support back into the Kiwi way of life as it was evolving in New Zealand. So I just find that amazing that actually how isolated maybe he was or he was not. Maybe his garden really helped him, but I just think that's amazing that he wasn't able to converse properly all the way through his life. But he must have done okay, because that's his brand new Buick, and he's got quite a fancy looking suit on and a big fat cigar, and he actually looks really happy. So go him, he did really well in his life. So my dad and my whānau, coming from the Lower Hutt area, we grew up in Wainuiomata. And actually we were a typical suburban family, and at that time in the 70s everybody had pretty much the same. And my dad, I was talking with David, we were typically Chinese, we were pretty humble and quiet, and Dad didn't really like us to be loud and boisterous and stand out a lot. He didn't really love me working in the fashion industry, but poor Dad, yeah, I was definitely not his fit. He still loves me anyway, thank goodness. But I ended up, my mum had a really strong love for clothing. She kept herself beautifully, and she trailed me all around shops putting things on lay-by throughout Wellington, even down as far as Nelson and up as far as Kapiti. So I knew every clothes shop in Welly, even by the time I was 12. But through that, I ended up getting a job with a tailor here in Wellington, and then they said that it came back to me that I was annoyingly enthusiastic. And so after 3 years, they really gave me some good rope. But even after a while, I had another couple of jobs, and I still needed to get away from Wellington. It wasn't big enough. So off I went to London. And when I got to London, it was a real shock to me, the wealth that was in the department stores. I'd never seen anything like it. The layers of perfume, the racks and racks of clothes, the glamour, the bling. But when you walked outside the department store, someone was homeless asking you for money. And it was funny that as I was putting this talk together, it made me realise how that's actually now normal in Wellington. And yet as a young 21-year-old woman, I was shocked that that was a thing that could be. So all the glam and bling in London didn't really sit too well with me. But then I found this shop called The Body Shop. And what Anita, the founder Anita Roddick, did really inspired me for all my life. And that's me with Anita there when she came to New Zealand. So my team actually got me a ticket to go to a breakfast with her. She's since passed on, but the way she did business for her time was amazing. And she taught us, basically, as well as selling beautiful beauty products, she was talking about stop burning the rainforest. Well, as a young Kiwi from New Zealand, I had no idea that we were burning the rainforest in the Amazon. She talked about creating soap factories in ex-mining towns in the UK to help the unemployed that were really struggling there. And she was the first one to coin the phrase reduce, reuse, recycle. Or actually for her it was refill, because you could refill your bottles in her stores. So this was in the 90s. And this business and the feeling of your store really stuck with me. And a little bit like Golriz, I didn't really have a 10-year plan, but I was going into business. It wasn't how, or it was just when. So I carried a little book with me and I wrote down everything on my travels. So 3 years after the UK, I'm just going to cut really short because otherwise but interesting, it does tie into Golriz's story. I knew I wanted to come home and I wanted to start a business. But what was happening for me was the fashion industry wasn't sitting well with me. I didn't like what it stood for. But then I had a strong nudge, I'm going to call them nudges for this talk, that actually, Laurie, go home and do your business, but do it your way. And so with that kind of gut speaking to me, I came home and started a business. Can you flip on to the next one, please, David? Right over the road in what was the Wakefield Street Market about 25 or so years ago, called Jive Junkies. And this is my sister and I, you can't really see. I had no money, so this is a good survive bit. $133 we started that store on. I drove all around New Zealand visiting my friends and collecting really cool, amazing clothes. And then I'd get home, remodel them, reshape them, wash them, put them on the rack, sell them to go out dancing that night. And actually, we made a lot of money. I was a bit like the Princess and the Pea with the bruise from the cash under my mattress. It's not like that anymore, I can tell you. So we were actually upcycling before it was a term, just intuitively. And so from there, after 2 years, we cut through onto the high street and opened our first shop called Starfish in Willis Street. And we really got our name through, can you flip forward, David? Thank you. While, same again, fashion started to not sit right with me. It was because of the message that we were putting out, and it didn't talk to New Zealand and New Zealanders. So we started to talk about thread Kiwiism through our collections and through our stories, so we could highlight who we were. Whereas a lot of New Zealand at the time was looking overseas for the big glam in the 80s and the 90s to the things that were going on. Another one of our collections, which was called Urban Progression, really highlighted residents who were living across on a street or in houses that were about to be demolished for a motorway. And at the time, there were a lot of really cool, funky businesses they had started in Wellington because it had been a blank canvas of boredom. And Starfish, my business, was one of them. No, true. It was very boring. Grey, I called it, very grey. And so I couldn't understand why we would put a motorway through an arts and cultural historic precinct when I'd just come back from Europe and everyone else was making money out of it. So what we did was we rallied a whole lot of businesses together to really kind of fight to hold for the environmental reasons, but also the historic and cultural reasons to not put the motorway through. We didn't win that case, and it actually gave 5 years out of my life to that, but some of the best lessons I've ever learned. But what we did get was we got it calmed down, and so things like putting trees, having the historic buildings preserved, things like that. So David, next slide. So from there, I started to question, kia ora Linda, welcome, lovely to see you, yay. I started to have children. I started to worry about our business was picking up. We were producing what I felt was a lot of frocks. And while we were made in New Zealand, I couldn't really see how the fabrics we were producing were being made, and it really worried me. So the vision of dye in the rivers was a big, strong one. And then I found this magazine. I carry these in my little talk pieces, but this is the original magazine that I opened. And I found out about all these other brands, mostly from the UK, who are trying to do business better for the environment, like Patagonia, Howie's, and Veja Shoes, who are making them in a fair trade factory in Brazil. And at that moment, I knew, as I was holding my second child, that we would not go back to making clothes that we couldn't understand the traceability of the fabrics and the fibres. So from there, we set our values, and for us it was really about being, if we were going to make anything at all, to make sure that things were timeless, that they would be well made and New Zealand made. We wanted to keep our manufacturing on shore here in New Zealand, and that we, hold the phone, David, and that we'd really look at the fabrics that we were using and use fabrics that were dyed environmentally friendly and were organic and what we could. It wasn't that easy. It sounds easy now. I've got dents in my forehead from where I smashed my head on the table in frustration because they don't do sometimes what you want them to do. But really, as David was saying, we were a pioneer in this space, and so but through this commitment, through these stands, we started to get noticed. We won that Sustainable Business Award for the organisation that I work for now. And talking about mentors, that's me and Auntie Helen. That's one of my favourite pictures. And then we were first to open at Fashion Week one year with New Zealand Fashion Week's first eco show, if you could call it that. There's a lot of queries around terms. And then after that, we also became real ambassadors for things that were going on around fair trade, planting trees with Project Crimson, working with WWF, and then using our stores to carry other labels that were trying to do well by social issues and environmental issues as well. So amazing journey. But my journey had started to come to an end, and there were certain reasons, but I had to make the hardest decision of my life, and that was to shut that business down after 20 years. And I think the interesting thing was that business was more demanding than my children, and I possibly gave it more than my children. Anyone that has a business knows how much it takes. The other thing was that it was so public. Starfish was so loved by so many Kiwis, and there was no way we could just quietly slip out the back door. So it was front page news, it was right through the whole city. So David, flick over. And it was right at this time when our Prime Minister at the time said, Wellington is a dying city. And I can remember we just had to announce our closure. It really was like everyone in Wellington was walking around with a paper bag over the head like this. It was very dark, and I can remember that headline on the news one day as we were walking down Waller Street, just feeling so low and so glum about the state of everything. So a really interesting time for me, really hard cut to take, but I'm glad it was fast. The thing that we did do, Starfish has been acknowledged for being a pioneer, and Te Papa houses some of our collections as New Zealand's first eco-friendly fashion label. We educated all the women, mostly women, that work with us, and thousands of women over New Zealand about thinking about how their clothes were made. And still today, I get every day, not a day goes past where I get someone saying, oh, I miss this, or can you make me another one of those, or gosh, we miss you. And it's an amazing feeling. And you know what, I've even started buying my own clothes back on Trade Me. I know the cut, I know the fabric, I know when it works, and so it's great. They're still in the system, and that makes me really proud. So from there, I had another nudge. It was a quiet time, no meetings, no collections to design, no shops to run, and I was at a New Zealand Wellington Film Festival, and I had a shoulder tap from a friend, and she said, I know, Laurie, you can take over my radio show. And I went, I can't do that. And my head was going like this. And I couldn't believe it. So I started, and I thought that I could do it, just listen to music, but actually it became about stories. Stories of Wellingtonians who were doing amazing things, unsung heroes, B-siders. Since we've launched B-side stories, we've interviewed hundreds of Wellingtonians and given voice to what they're doing, and we're up to, I just checked last night, about 44,000 listens, which for a small radio show on a community radio station, I feel pretty stoked about that. And they're an amazing crew that have carried on B-sides, because I haven't been very present this year, but that's because I've been busy at the Sustainable Business Network, which is my job at the moment. And I guess the main thing with the Sustainable Business Network, we're there to support businesses on their environmentally and social impact journey. And it's an amazing role. I've been there for 4 years, and I'll do anything to make sure we get their stories out there, because what we do hear are the not great stories, and all I can hear are these amazing stories of people trying to make change. And that's why I'm so excited about every day. But at the Sustainable Business Network, I do have to do a quick plug because I'm still in work time. It is a membership organisation, and if you have a business, you can join. But how we do our work is mostly through events where we're really about sharing knowledge and information and inspiration to help people make the changes easily that they can in business, so that we're having a positive impact. We'll do it through, I love it. You're looking at me and I'm going, David, Hugh. You can't see, that's at an awards event just this year down at Wellington Zoo. We had 17 businesses were finalists in the overall awards nationally. That's when I'm really excited. And then also there's another one, planting trees out in Wainuiomata. That's the kind of thing we'll also get businesses out doing. So just to wrap up, last year I got another nudge from a dear friend in the room. There was a seat going down on the Southern Ward for Wellington City Council. And because I've been pledging to a goal, just a vision to see Wellington be the coolest little sustainable capital in the world, David pretty much pushed me over the line and said, you should stand for council. So I did stand for council last year, and it was an amazing experience. We didn't quite get in. We were about 300 shy of the Labour candidate. And she's great. We're great to have Fleur in there, but we led a very colourful campaign, unique campaign to say the least. We wanted to make it really good fun, and we never know what might happen next year. So just to summarise, just a couple of tips to survive, thrive and lead. I think I've been trying to illustrate that I've always stood for something, and that's really put me in good stead. And even though I've had to take a fall a couple of times, it's ultimately come back as the right thing to do. Relationships, when I got cut out of Starfish, when I had to let that go, I walked away with not a cent, a suitcase full of nice clothes, but the relationships have the other thing that have put me proud. So going forward, I've managed, you know, that's so important. That was the best asset I could have, to collaborate, to make partnerships. Whatever you do, those relationships are the best thing. Find your inspiration, whoever they are. Keep them around you, because they're a benchmark for really pushing yourself, and sometimes you really have to push yourself where it's not comfortable to do these things. And the last one was just listen for your nudge, because it's really easy to skate over the top of that. Those little things that are prodding away at you to do those things that we're, because ultimately we're afraid of them, right? And then last is, this is a shot from a collection called The Garden of Perfect Happiness, which was inspired by my grandfather in his garden out in Petone. And I really thought about how it was for him in that garden. So we really wanted to put the joy across that being in a garden can bring. And this year we were honoured to have an exhibition on great-grandfather William at Petone Settlers Museum. It's still on there, where they featured his story of being the first naturalised Chinese in Wellington. And I think, you know, great-grandfather certainly had to survive, and then we can see that he did thrive, and he would never have called himself a leader, but he is to me. Kia ora.
Really inspiring story, and it's it really showing that you are a true trailblazer, change maker, and pioneer. But I forgot to mention, we are actually live streaming this to about 5 billion people around the world. So does anyone have any issues with being
Too late. Yes.
So sorry. My
I've changed some of that.
But
I was comfortable here.
They are watching right now. And before we head into questions, I'd like to ask a real quick question. Where do you find this energy? Because I've known you for quite a few years now. You're always positive. You must have the same blood group as me, which is be positive. So where do you find the energy?
You know, I don't actually tell this story, but I met my old English teacher a couple of years ago in Unity. Proud to say that that's a great shop of Wellington. And she said to me, "How are you? Because you were always so sad growing up." And I was shocked. But then I remembered, like anyone, I was a teenager and my mum and dad were breaking up at the time, and I was deeply saddened by that, and it must have put it out there. So I have actually trained myself to be happy and energetic. So even when I don't feel like it, I push it.
You sound like one of the pink songs about shouting and being loud.
No, I mean, but I balance, and so while being probably quite extrovert, I definitely have to unplug in the weekends and shut everything down and have a lot of quiet time. That's how I do it. So I'm not on all the time. Any other questions?
Laurie, thank you for sharing your inspirational story.
Yeah, class.
I'm interested in hearing at what point did you decide to connect with your Māori and Chinese whakapapa, and do you think your journey would have been different had you, say, looked more visibly Asian or Māori?
I think that's an amazing question. I've always held on to my name, and even when getting married, it was like, no way. But I've celebrated it because it's what has made me unique. But I agree, like maybe my path may have been different if I looked more Asian, but in the same way, I'd say that a lot of stuff I went through being a woman also was something that I challenged a lot. And the only time I ever came up against any woman was with a bank manager. Every other way it was easy to cut through, and that I found really interesting. Yeah, so being female and being Asian, but yeah. So at what point?
Yeah, because you said that's something that you've...
It's more recent. I think the mihi has enabled me to really bring my Chinese into the conversation. Whereas before we just say, hey, I'm Laurie Foon, and you've got a guess that I might be Chinese, and you might go down that road, but I'm allowed to announce it through the mihi. So that's been really amazing. I think just age and experience, but really lots of little things have contributed to celebrating my Chinese heritage, but it has been later in life, not earlier. And I have been in touch with a good Chinese community here in Wellington, but funnily enough, not through family, just through a good friend who was like, hey, you're Chinese, come and hang out with us. Yeah. And they're all very Kiwi Chinese, so it's quite funny when they're watching the rugby. Cool. Any other questions?
Laurie, my field was sustainability. I'm from Sri Lanka. I moved to New Zealand last year.
Oh, welcome. I went to Sri Lanka last year. What an amazing
Yeah,
country.
I was a project officer of Unido project for set up in my country to promote sustainability concepts to the government and to the industries and the community. So I started my career 2002 as a volunteer to that project.
Right.
While I was doing my master's, then they invited to be a permanent employee there. So then I moved to another government agency that is again green economic concepts developed working with local entrepreneurs. Yes, that is Asian Productivity Organization. So again a concept for green productivity. So I moved here because of my children.
Cool.
So in my age of 40 years now, I'm 40 years old now.
Oh,
So, so I'm struggling to get a job, but because here in New Zealand it's a high level topic, climate change, sustainability. But still I couldn't find anything to contribute my knowledge and experience to this economy.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, yesterday in the night I was so much frustrated.
Yes.
And so I applied jobs, writing CVs, cover letters. It's like terrified thing. So I was thinking to some kind of meditation. So what kind of advice that you can give?
The reality is that I've just noticed there are more and more jobs for sustainability coming up, but there are still not a lot. If you think about the big companies in New Zealand, there aren't really a lot. And even for them to employ one sustainability manager is a big commitment from them, and that kind of get very, oh look, we have a sustainability manager. And where we're seeing the most success is actually people going into jobs with sustainability as another asset, you know, another string to their bow. And then it does take your passion kind of going in and helping the, whatever's going on so that businesses can see how good it is for them. So you've kind of got to Trojan horse it a little bit, is one tactic. Because there isn't one, if any business out there is not thinking about it, they're in the last curve, they're right, they're tailored, you don't want to work for them anyway. I can give you my card and just try and show you some.
Yeah, I'm happy to do some volunteer work for this SBN.
Yes, good.
Yeah, yes.
Right. We do a lot of drinking wine. It's very hard work.
Yeah, of course, it's not easy to influence people to learn it because it's totally behavioral change something with technology. It's a mix of behavior change, technology, and the enthusiasm.
Yes.
Yeah.
We need everything.
Everything.
And fast.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions?
Can I just follow on that?
Yes,
Sustainability. We loved it before my brain moving into expressions. So sustainability is one thing, and obviously on the other side, we need to kind of look at how we consume, and businesses doing sustainability and manufacturers and companies selling stuff to people and being more sustainable about that process is one thing. What's the other side of it in terms of conscious consumption, and where do you see that as from a personal point of view, but also from an SPM point of view? Where do you see that balancing act
It's not a one word answer. From that, so myself personally, I do live our family does live very frugally, and my kids come home going, Mom, I got a plastic bag, I'm so sorry. So they are devastated if that happens to them. My kids' friends you can't take, they are all welcome, but no plastic in the house. If they bring plastic into single-use plastic, they get to have the talk, and they all know it. So those are the measures, I guess, as a family we're going to. But we try and make it fun too, because it's not going to work if it's not fun. So personally, it's about minimising living light, and when we buy well, we buy right. But we're privileged to be able to do that. I have a sister that needs to get something today as cheap as she can, and so there's a reality check there. As far as business goes, yes, we're advocating for living light, but also what we're wanting to do is see businesses, so I've just got to pull my train of thought here, it's just trying to get the tipping point right. And so while in one way, it's everyone's got a different path to roam, and we're saying it doesn't matter what path you jump on one path. And even if you start buying this thing, because that's what happened to me in retail, we were like, don't buy that, buy this is better. But now I would never go back into that business, into fashion, because I couldn't even say, buy this because it's better. So everything is a pathway, and so our line tends to be jump on the road somewhere, because if you start on that road, it's a bit like yoga, you'll get to enlightenment at the end.
We have time, can I add something? So one side consumers, one side producers. So producers want what consumers need, and at the same time producers, they make a need for the consumers to make this, buy this. So so when we go back sometime, in 19th century or some back, they had sustainability life, but with the desires of the people and with the competitiveness open to the world, so people need many things came, then producers, they wanted to produce very fast and many things, then resource consumption went high, pollution came, so Japan. So consumers, they can see a lot of things in the market, so they automatically get desire to buy that, consume that. That's the way our balance went wrong.
Yeah. And actually just one thing that we've just started on the journey, and we realise we're right at the front end, but the circular economy is something we're really advocating for. And the way that works are just two lines underpinned by renewable energy. And so one everything needs to be organic, so it can go back into the system, go back into the ground, or in the case, and a good example that we've got going on here in Wellington is flight plastics with number one plastic. Plastic is not necessarily bad if we can keep it in the system and keep it going around. And so I think even working in sustainability for so long, there's definitely moments where it feels so overwhelming, but the circular economy system is one that's given me a bit of hope, because I think we could actually work to that and keep our jobs and keep things flowing us.
Yeah, and I think we talk about the themes of surviving, thriving, and leading. We really need people to lead on that, and that's where the circular economy is taking off, has been taking off over the past 5 years. But if we need, we need organisations to step up, be courageous, lead, take a risk, and first for early risk.
Yes.
And what I'm seeing at the moment around the world, maybe not so much in New Zealand, because certainly I can't tell what's going on here. But what I'm seeing around the world is we have a crisis of leadership, where we don't have people who are in positions of power and privilege willing to be the first movers, because there's just too much risk to the shareholder value, to their profits, to their bottom line. So I'm really curious to explore over the next few months and years how it works out, how it looks here in New Zealand, because for me the reason why I moved here is because New Zealanders are always being reminded that kind of trailblazer, it's just get on and do stuff. Don't worry about the red tape or naysayers and stuff like that. Am I wrong?
I'm going to have that like knocked out of me quite soon. Not yet. Not
Let's
yet.
not burst her bubble.
That's my bubble. I'm fresh off the main.
Yeah, no, just hold that.
Yeah. Or maybe there's lots of opportunity for people.
But we need support, and maybe the fifth, I couldn't find the words because I don't like the word failure, but how do we accept that trial and not succeeding this time is ace, because we're giving it a go.
And we've learned.
And we've learned.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to endorse, you know, and have our shareholders and our boards going, yep, we're willing to cut up 10% and pass that to that place. But that's where the opportunity is for New Zealand, right? Because then we can get the innovation happening, and then, yeah, that's, so,
Well,
yeah.
we want to be the tech centre of the world.
Yeah.
I think there's something there in terms of social license, because I think everyone's looking at social license, law, like, what the markets are as well. Some of it is coming from multinational companies, what is that? Feel that it's kind of then there's a movement. It's not consistently happening or happening across the board. There are shifts and all these things.
Yeah, and as a new arrival coming into this country with a fresh perspective, there's a lot more happening here than in many other countries in the world. In terms of climate change, in terms of even declarations. Okay, so talk is yeah, you know, the fact that it exists, the fact that, you know, there's declarations, there's you know, plastic bag bans and stuff like that. I mean, I'm just coming from London where, well, actually I'm Australian, but I came in from London where we had a plastic bag ban and it went through without any issues,
Yeah.
not many issues. And then recently in Australia we tried to ban that and people were up in arms. You know, how are people going to carry stuff home? Well, I don't know. Like, get a canvas bag, you know?
Work it out.
Work it out. They were like punch-ups at the cashiers, or alleged punch-ups. You know, this is the Herald Sun, so we don't really know. But, you know, and then I remember taking a fresh perspective and having all this baggage and knowledge from my travels around the world. Things do seem to be a lot more, at least people get it, and they are making the right noises. Whether or not it happens and translates into action, that's different, but that's yet to be seen, but we are making the right noises here.
We did have to get legislation, and we did hit a tipping point all
And
at
they
the
were
same
always-
time. Do you think, Linda, that was a,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but the, yeah, yeah.
And
So I was a big advocate for business. We can do it. Now I'm like, nah, legislation. Yeah.
Because this time last year we put out a plastic bag ban.
Mm.
It would have been, no way, we can't do it.
Yeah, we can't do it.
yeah, and then the planet happens,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
everyone,
because
it's social movement.
yeah, it's human nature. No one wants to be the first, and no one wants to be the last. Right, so California, London, and then what we do.
But it's really hard. Last week there is a
I was just going to say, being first, today is 125th anniversary.
Yeah,
of
yay.
suffrage, and yeah, so New Zealand is first.
Yeah, good. Let's find that.
But I need to connect with you because talking about sustainability, so my theatre projects coming up will be involving off the grid,
Yeah. Oh,
working and renewable sustainable and theatre venues. So I'll have to text you after.
Okay.
Connecting up with
right. Fantastic. Can I?
Yes, should we have a little time out, grab some food and drink, and then we switch into the more interactive part, which is actually the soapbox. So the soapbox, I think we have a few speakers. It's just it's a little bit more than your elevator pitch, but it's not a speech. I think we have a few people who want to just tell their story, because Nzal is all about storytelling, and we all want to hear one story. So if you feel inspired to have your little 2 minutes of this is my little story around those 3 themes of survival.
Shall we find out who would like to
Oh
tell
yes,
a
so
story
I-
first?
who would like to? I mean, after the food, we can start on the soapbox. So who would like to? I think there are at least 3 or 4 people who want to tell the story.
Probably just introduce myself.
Okay. You talking about YouTube? Is it? I think so. You want to tell your story? Well, let's grab food first. Have a mix and mingle, and then we'll come back for the soapbox. Thank you.